say the Jesus prayer while I'm doing it, and then when I get to a certain point, when I'm doing the seal and then putting the holes in with the toothpick, I pray prayers, as you'll see when we get to that point. Okay, so what I've actually done is I started a batch ahead of time so that we could work on some different things simultaneously. But we'll go ahead and start with mixing all of the ingredients from the beginning of the process. So I'll just mention that my favorite flour to use is, I like to use organic flour. And it doesn't have to be organic, but we do use white flour as opposed to whole wheat flour. Of course, these days it might be more expensive to buy the whole wheat flour, but back in the day the refined flour was like the good stuff, you know. So use the good stuff, use the best that you've got. And so that's traditionally it's white flour, white bread. So anyway, it could just be regular all-purpose enriched flour, but that does have ingredients other than wheat, which is what I noticed. So I like using the organic flour because it's just wheat. It doesn't have any additives. It doesn't have, sometimes they throw in like a little corn flour or something else. Yeah, if you read the labels, it might have other ingredients. So, and also, you know, in our, the ladies made the cookbook. The ladies cookbook has a recipe, so it has like all the proportions in that, you know, use so many cups of flour and all of that. But after lots of years of doing this, I just sort of do it by the way it feels. And really, I mean, I think that's the best, because sometimes the conditions are different. Like if it's more humid or drier, or you happen to have a little bit more water or whatever, then it's not going to be the same number of cups of flour, but you want it to be the right consistency. So that's why I do it that way. I do it by consistency rather than particular amounts. So anyway, we have to begin with the water, and so I always boil a little water because I want to get it to the right temperature, which is, I do it between about 100 degrees and 110 degrees, anywhere in there, usually aiming for about 105. So I start with some hot water, and then might add some cold water, and then I'll take the temperature and see if it's about the right temperature. This was actually cold from the refrigerator, so I'll probably have to add more hot water to get it about right. And normally I start with about 1.5 cups of water. It doesn't have to be, as long as the ingredients are proportioned right. But that's usually what I do, is about 1.5 cups of water. Take the temperature here, see what it is. That's pretty cool, because we added the cold water, so I'm going to add more hot water, and if I have to dump some out, I'll do that. So it looks like it's getting up close to 100 now. I think I'll dump a little bit of this out and then add some more hot water. Yeah, it's just a little under 100. I mean, it'll work if it's a little under 100 or, you know, above 110, but I think that's the ideal window, is between 100 and 110. All right, it's looking like about a little over 100 now, and that's pretty close to 1.5 cups. I'll just add a little bit more hot water. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so we add the yeast. And the proportion of yeast to flour should be about half a teaspoon of yeast per cup of flour. I think that's actually what the yeast will tell you. And by the way, I usually use the quick rise yeast. I mean, you don't have to, but if you use the other kind, you might have to start it ahead of time, depending on what you use. Seeing a bubble in there. I thought it was something floating in the water, so I'm making sure I don't have something floating in the water in there. So I'm going to add 1 teaspoon and another, because we'll have, with a cup and a half of water, it's going to be at least 4 or 4.5 cups of flour. So I know I need at least 2 teaspoons of yeast, and I'm going to add about another half. Stir it up. Probably takes a minute or two to really dissolve. And you could add the salt to the water in the measuring glass, in the measuring cup, but I usually add it once I put it in the bowl. Just get it pretty well dissolved, and then I'll transfer it into the bowl and put the salt in. So it's just 4 ingredients that go into Orthodox holy bread, and you might link that with the 4 evangelists. It's a good way to remember. We have the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we have 4 ingredients in our holy bread: water, yeast, salt, and flour. So it's not supposed to have any oil or added sugar or anything like that. Dump that in there.
Does it matter that there's a lot of the yeast stuck to the back of the spoon?
Oh, I'm glad you saw that. I didn't realize. Yeah, we don't want to lose that much of the yeast. Get that off of there. All right, now you can use different kinds of salt. I just happened to buy this big thing of the coarse ground salt at Sam's Club. So I actually didn't even realize it was the coarse salt when I bought it. I just thought I was getting lots of salt. No, this is good. Okay. It's when you're adding it to the warm water, it'll dissolve really easily. Okay. It's just you have to use a little bit more. Like the recipe calls for a teaspoon of salt, but I do about, I make it mounded and do probably about a teaspoon and a half of the coarse salt, because it's not as dense, because it's coarse, it's not as packed. There's not as much packed into the measuring spoon. All right, so just stir that so it dissolves. And every once in a while, somebody, and I've done this, forgets the salt or adds too much salt, and you can tell. If you accidentally double the salt, it's really salty. If you forget the salt, it just doesn't have any flavor, which is a nice connection with what the Lord says in the gospel about being the salt of the earth and not wanting to lose our flavor. Well, bread without salt doesn't have any flavor. Okay, so the only ingredient left is the flour. So the way I do this, when I started making the holy bread, I would always measure it out 1 cup at a time, and all of that. But I stopped doing that because, like I said, I got to the point where I would just do it by the consistency, by the way it feels, because I realized, well, I measured out 5 cups, but that's too much. It's not working, or whatever. So now I just dump it in, and usually I kind of, I estimate maybe about 3 cups, let's say, and then start mixing it, and then I'll just add a little bit at a time after that until it gets to the right consistency. and I use the spoon to stir it until it's relatively less sticky, to say. And when it comes to the consistency, I know some people who give recipes, they'll say they want it to be fairly sticky. I think there's a happy medium where it's not too dry, but it's not too sticky, and it's easier to work with if it's not too sticky. But you can always add a little more flour or a little more water if you end up with it being too dry or too sticky. Okay, I think it's ready now to start using my hands. Get the extra flour off the spoon there. Okay, and so it feels like it's not going to take a whole lot more flour to be the right consistency, but it'll take a little bit more. I'm just going to roll up my sleeve a little bit here. It doesn't get in there. And when I knead it, I just knead it in the bowl. I know some people take it out and do it on a flat surface, but the bowl seems to work well for me. Of course, having it at the right height makes a big difference. I don't know if you all have found that.
Yeah, I either have to get a stepladder if I'm gonna do it on the counter,
Yeah,
or get a TV tray so it's lower
right.
because I'm short.
I always do it on my countertop. I really am. Maybe I should put it on the table.
Yeah, this
Is it
table's a
better?
little on the low side for me.
Yeah.
It's lower than the counter, but it actually, if it's lower, it's easier.
So
I
you
think
always need it in the bowl like that?
I always need it in the bowl. So I just kind of do this until I get most of the flour and the pieces, the kind of dried pieces, are incorporated in the mass of dough, and then I start kneading it with two hands like this. And I know there are different techniques for kneading. Like a lot of people will just do roll it like that and just keep rolling with one hand. But I've always found that doing it this way, it's less work for one arm, and just seems to work well. So this is a little on the sticky side still. I feel like I'm gonna need to add some more flour, but it doesn't quite feel like it needs it yet. So I'm gonna knead a little bit and then probably add a little bit of flour. Sometimes I have to adjust where my bowl is if it's sliding away. And if it were really sticky, this would be harder because it would kind of be pulling the bowl more. So that's one reason why I don't like to start kneading it until it's not too sticky. And it has to be pretty well kneaded. The thing is, with the holy bread, you don't want any air pockets in it. And I started a batch of dough earlier so that I can put it in the oven while this one is rising. And because I'm hoping to actually show you how I prepare the bread for the proskymidi, for the liturgy, so you can see why it needs to be a particular way.
Sounds good.
Yes.
So I usually, once I get to this point of kneading with two hands, I usually do it for at least about 5 minutes.
Okay.
And what this, I mean, y'all know this, I'm sure, but the kneading helps to get the air pockets out. It helps it to be more consistent, not to have big bubbles of gas as it's rising, you know? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and just put a tiny bit more flour. It really doesn't feel like it needs much more. It's faster now because it's not sticky. sometimes if I add too much flour, or if, not too much, but if I add a larger amount, because it needs a larger amount, and it's taking a long time for it to incorporate all the flour, I'll kind of open it up so it has more of a sticky surface, and then grab the flour like that. That just speeds up the process a little bit. Not that the goal is to be speedy necessarily. Then when you get to the rising part, there are different techniques. Some people might let it rise twice, but the way I do it is just a single rise. Also, when people make the loaves, sometimes they do it in two sections, where you put one on top of the other, and there's even a one where you put a cross inside and
That's
all
what I do.
that.
That's what Miss Eddie taught me.
Is that how?
Yep.
Yeah.
Kiki taught her.
That's right. So you can do it that way. That's a tradition. It's the traditional way to do it, but it's also common just to do it in one single ball. You know, that then you flatten and you put the seal on top of it. All right. So it feels to me like it's pretty much the consistency we want.
That's what I want to see. Is
Yeah.
what consistent. Okay.
So it's a little bit sticky, but not very. It's mostly, you see, it's not coming away on my hands. Like if it were very sticky, it would make more of a mess on my hands. But you don't want it too dry either,
Okay.
right? So I'd say that's a pretty good consistency. So I'll just knead it for maybe another minute. Putting a little more force into it to make sure it's thoroughly kneaded. And then I just kind of press it down into the bowl. Yeah.
And let it rise?
Yeah. Do you want to feel what it feels like?
Yes.
Is that helpful?
Well, yes.
You